What Elon Musk has been doing with his Doge team is, to my mind, an obviously illegal assault on the federal government. It's totally in violation of the Constitution and the law. It's also wildly destructive to people, just hacking away and making mistakes left and right and center. And it's gotten so bad that even MAGA Republicans who support slashing the government in principle are starting to get real anxious. The New York Times describes what happened behind closed doors yesterday when simmering anger at the billionaire's unchecked power spilled out in a remarkable cabinet room meeting. The president quickly moved to rein in Mr. Musk. In one exchange described by the Times, Transportation Secretary, former Real World cast member Sean Duffy, squared off with Musk. Mr. Duffy said the young staff of Mr. Musk's team was trying to lay off air traffic controllers. What am I supposed to do? Mr. Duffy said. I have multiple plane crashes to deal with now, and your people want me to fire air traffic controllers? Mr. Musk told Mr. Duffy that his assertion was a lie. Mr. Duffy insisted it was not. He had heard it from them directly. At another point, Mr. Musk insisted that people hired under diversity, equity, and inclusion programs were working in control towers. Mr. Duffy pushed back, and Mr. Musk did not add details, but said during the longer back and forth that Mr. Duffy had his phone number and should call him if he had any issues to raise. The exchange ended with Mr. Trump telling Mr. Duffy that he had to hire people from MIT as air traffic controllers. These air traffic controllers need to be geniuses, he said. Oh, there's so much there. And it's not just cabinet members who are starting to have some unease about Musk and his methods. Joining me now is someone who's been closely tracking Musk's illegal assaults on the American government, Josh Marshall, founder and editor-in-chief of Talking Points Memo. Josh, you've been reporting on this at your great outlet, your great independent journalistic outlet, which is doing great work, Talking Points Memo.
Thank you.
And I feel like we've been on the same wavelength, which is just the entire construct of this thing. Someone described it as not unconstitutional, but anti-constitutional. That it's just so clearly beyond the pale of the founder's constitutional structure. And one of the clarifying moments before we get to the cabinet was the senators and members of Congress, which was a day earlier, being like, what about all this stuff? And Musk saying, you can call me. You got a direct line if we mess up and you need to reestablish some funding. And you're basically like, that's not how this all works.
Yeah, that's an understatement. I mean, you had this very, there's one issue of why do only Republicans get to be involved in the government now? But set that aside, you have this very perverse situation where you have Congress, the budget setting authority, the one that makes a law that is the budget, that is the appropriations, saying, can we get that one thing back? You know, they're going hat in hand to this guy who's not even an appointee. That part, first of all, is just bizarre. That is the total anti of how anything is supposed to work. And then the part you just mentioned with the cabinet secretaries, they're begging. And you start thinking back of like, who is this? You know, we all saw Schoolhouse Rock, right? There's the president and there's the Congress. And who's this new player that is not really any of them? Right. I mean, the whole thing is bizarre. And you're right. It's not there are various things that are unconstitutional, but you could sort of imagine there might have been a slightly different constitution and it might have been that way. But there's nothing where you would have had this. Yeah. Like, let's just find this random dude from the outside who has nothing to do with anything, but he is in charge of everything. That makes no sense at all.
That's a great point, right? The Article 1 congressional branch, they don't have the power of the purse anymore because Elon Musk has it. In fact, this is what I love this idea. From that meeting that you were writing about, and I've been thinking about, some senators, these are Republican senators only, were given Musk's phone number during Wednesday's meeting. The entrepreneur said he would create a system where members of Congress can call some central group to get problematic cuts reversed quickly. It's like, guys, I got news for you. You're the system. Congress is the central system that decides. Yeah. So then they're not in power. But even Article 2, the cabinet officials who are Senate confirmed, who are in the Constitution, they're apparently not in power. And Sean Duffy sounds like an MSNBC host saying, you want me to fire air traffic controllers.
Yeah, I was going to say, I hadn't seen Sean said that yet, man. I'm going to run with that quote tomorrow, right? That's amazing. But yes, it's so perverse. And the one thing you get to, and what really came out, I was quoting from an earlier piece in the Washington Post, but about the same meetings with up on Capitol Hill. And what's so strange is there's one point where they say, on the one hand, they're saying, hey, we got to take charge back here. We're Congress. Yep. You need to run this by us. And then there's this transition in that piece where the Post authors say, but it's not so clear that the Congress actually wants to vote on this.
That's right.
Or if they're prepared. And that is the sort of the epiphany moment, because everything starts to come together there, where you see that they want to be out of the loop. They want to be, because there was this one thing where Nick Begich, the freshman congressman from Alaska, he flies back into Alaska. Some people kind of catch him there at the airport, and they're saying, this is terrible. And he's saying, hey, well, I'm out of the loop. I can't do anything about it. I'm just in Congress. And that is kind of, on the one hand, you say, oh, that's crazy and everything. But that is what they want here. Because if you're Congress and you want to say, hey, we're going to cut all these things, then you've got to pass a bill and you got to write it down. And then you have to say, do you want to vote for it or against it? And when you vote for it, then there's going to be an election. And you start to see how all of this comes together, where everybody wants to be out of the loop.
That's right.
The president's out of the loop. Congress is out of the loop. And it kind of works for everybody.
Yeah, he's the hitman. He's the hatchet man. He's doing the dirty work, right? He and everyone else can just be like, I don't know, and he never has to stand for election, right? So it's a sort of perfect. And then you have this great scoop today, which is about, again, these sort of insane assertions of authority, this kind of authoritarian putsch, this sort of anti-constitutional authority. You got a scoop today about a claim that Trump is now making. Basically, their position is that any independent agency under the Constitution is not independent, and actually Trump could do whatever he wants. And they wrote this memo with this tiny little aid agency for African development, which was actually created by statute in 1980. We covered them yesterday, how their staff wouldn't let the Doge backpack boys in, although today they showed up at the U.S. Marshal and got in. But in this memo, describing what their theory of executive authority is.
Well, we all know that, and many right-wing judges think, that the president has these inherent authorities to kind of fire anybody. Okay, that's one thing. But then there's the question, how can you appoint? Okay. Right. Now, there are specifics about this one agency, this foundation, that Congress accepted them from the law that allows all of those actings, and you can do this acting, that acting. Exactly. Okay. So everything defaults back to the plain old Constitution, which is that the Senate has to confirm. So in this email to a member of the board of that agency, a White House staffer said, we can't have, the Vacancies Act won't help us. So we're down to the appointments clause, which, again, Senate consent. And he said, we can't work with that. So he basically says in this memo, the appointments clause, a part of the Constitution, is itself unconstitutional.
Exactly.
Because Trump's inherent power just can't work with it. It's too big for the both of us Constitution, right? Basically,
this staffer writes the appointments clause that is in the Constitution about how appointments happen out of the Constitution because it conflicts with the inherent authority of the President of the United States. The appointments clause, that's in the text of the Constitution.
Yeah, I mean, they were basically saying this one part of the Constitution turns out to be unconstitutional. Like, you wouldn't have thought, but that's where, that's where we are. And so the key is here is that this is a memo to a part of this independent agency saying, hey, we're in charge, and this is why. So they've sort of hinted at this in some court filings, but they haven't said it yet. So this was kind of I'm not sure you'd say it was a secret email. It's not a public email. We obtained access to it. It's going to be a question. Are they going to bring that into court? Because I think even like Sam Alito or Clarence Thomas is going to look at that like, oh, I don't know, man. Yeah. That's a steep hill. I don't know if I can get there. So we will see.
We will see. Be sure to follow Josh's great work and all the people that work for him at TalkingPointsMemo.com. You can become a member, which I am, and I highly recommend. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks much.
In the latest chapter of Donald Trump's promised retribution, he has signed an executive order against a law firm called Perkins Coie. The executive order is a sweeping directive. It bans the federal government from hiring this one firm or from using contractors who work with this one firm, except in very limited circumstances. The executive order also bars this firm, Perkins Coie, employees from entering any federal building and suspends all of their security clearances. It is a direct hit against one of Trump's perceived political enemies in the private sector. The Washington law firm has, among many clients, represented Hillary Clinton and the DNC during the 2016 presidential race. Perkins Coie also handled the 65 lawsuits that the Trump campaign filed in their efforts to overturn his defeat in 2020 when he ran against Joe Biden. That firm won all but one of those cases, in excess of 60 cases against Team Trump, thanks in large part to a friend of this program, Mark Elias, who once worked at the firm. See? The dots are all connected. A spokesperson for Perkins Coie calls the executive order, quote, patently unlawful. They intend to challenge it. The Washington Post describes Trump's retaliation like this, quote, the move could have a chilling effect on law firms' willingness to take on clients and cases that run counter to the Trump administration, challenging a fundamental tenet of the rule of law in the United States that everyone should have access to legal representation. Joining our coverage, former RNC chairman, now MSNBC host and political analyst Michael Steele. Christy still with us. Michael Steele, have you seen the law firms that are currently in good standing step into the fray and publicly defend this law firm today?
No, and you won't, because they're part of the grift machine. Why would they? Why would they turn off that spigot? I think every law firm in this town and around the country should stand together and say, go ahead, try it. Try it. I mean, are you serious? I mean, the American people, you're looking at this and you think this is normal and okay to single out a law firm that happened to represent a political opponent of Donald Trump and the lawyers who were involved in cases and litigations against him? How dumb is that? And think about it in terms of if any other business in this country operated that way, where they would tell you, I'm sorry, we're not going to serve you the goods you ordered because you ordered from a competitor, or you also contribute money to an organization we don't like. I mean, this is just not normal. This is the musings and actions of a petty, afraid little man who's sitting behind a very big desk and wielding a lot of power. But at the end of the day, he's a scared little boy who feels that this is the only way he can get payback, is to go after the law firms who just did what they're supposed to do, what they were hired to do. And so I'm hoping the legal community, as an active member of the legal community, I'm hoping that we all stand together and go ahead, make our day. You know, you want to tie this up in litigation. Let's get this in front of the Supreme Court and let's hear what those lawyers have to say, because this is crazy.
Well, and I mean, Michael, still, I guess the point is, I mean, the enemies lists that have been public, right? The one that Kash Patel publicized, the people who've been attacked, they include Bill Barr. Is the law firm that represent Bill Barr not defending Perkins Coie because they think that he'll never write an executive order against the law firm defending Bill Barr? You couldn't get between Bill Barr and a camera when he wanted to tell any network how guilty Donald Trump was in the Mar-a-Lago case. Mark Esper is on the enemies list. Is the law firm representing Mark Esper going to defend Perkins Coie today? Because he could be next. John Bolton has been embroiled in litigation against Bill Barr's Justice Department for the better part of 6 years. I don't know who his lawyers are, but I looked before I came on the air. I looked in the break for a statement from his lawyers. I didn't see one. Liz Cheney's law firm, I mean, I'm sure Trump is targeting her. Don McGahn's lawyer was Bill Burke, who I think works for the Trump org now. I mean, the idea that anyone is safe is what Mike Pompeo was recently tossed off the island in the game of Survivor that is Trumpism. I don't know who his lawyers are, but the point is, you said they're keeping quiet because they think they're safe. No one is ever safe for long.
No, they're not. No, they're not. And that's the point. And the string of law firms that are associated with the individuals that you just identified should be the first ones out of the gate. What is the point of the oath that we swore as lawyers, right? We're here to defend those who otherwise would be persecuted by the very people like Donald Trump. That's what we're called to do. And so whether you're in a corporate setting or a litigation setting, no matter what you do in the law, we're all part of the same fraternity and sorority of lawyers who have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law and to protect those who have a matter to bring before the courts of this country. And we don't decide whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing for us financially, right? And so I'm hoping they stand up. I'm hoping this is just a momentary pause as they're sitting there writing the narrative that they're going to put out there publicly, because otherwise their silence is indicting them. And it is a dark day for the legal community if we allow this one man, I don't care if he is the president of the United States, because everything I was taught as a young lawyer was no one is above the law. Everything I was taught as a sworn officer of the court was nobody's above the law. What I was told when I swore my oath of office as an elected official, that no one is above the law. If we believe that's true, then prove it.
Christy, is it legal to single out a private company with retribution?
So I don't think this executive order is going to hold up. There are so many aspects of it that seem blatantly illegal. This idea that he could strip access to government buildings from these lawyers, so you can't walk into a courthouse or into an agency. That means you effectively can't do your job for your clients if you can't go to meetings or go to court proceedings or any of the number of things that happen in government buildings. That cannot possibly be legal. Things like stripping them of their security clearances, that he has a lot of discretion over. But again, if the reason that you are doing it is so that they cannot defend anybody who is in opposition to you, that again seems to interfere with your client's potential rights to effective counsel, also to due process rights. There is a procedure that they're supposed to go through, each of these agencies, to deny security clearance. Doesn't seem like he did that. He just did it with the stroke of a pen. Limiting interactions with employees of the firm, I don't even know how that's possible. How do you say, if you're on the other side, if you are the government, you're on the other side of a case with a Perkins Coie law firm, how do you limit the interaction with them? You have to deal with them to deal with your case. Like, it's practically moronic and stupid, but I think it will be struck down. But I think the larger point is this chilling effect, right? Because you are going to have people who say, well, if the government is not hiring people from this firm, I'm not going to go to that firm. I don't want to work at that firm. So you're going to affect potential applicants to the firm. You're going to affect potential clients to the firm who say, I'm not sure I want to bring my business to this firm if they're going to be all, dealing with this kind of opposition from DOJ. I'll just pick another law firm that isn't. So I think that is the intended impact, to make it hurt for the firm.
I guess the point is, in the year 9, though, Michael, the firms that are staying quiet today, I promise them, if it's not one of the people on this list who are on the public enemies list, it will be somebody else who is attached to one of your cases at one of your firms. They will come for everybody that stays quiet. The only thing they respond to is toughness.
They do. And that's why I would be less reticent and to remain quiet in this moment. And I think there is strength, and it's something that folks in Trump world count on. We just throw all of this up at the wall and everyone sees the pattern of it, and they get afraid and they back away and they don't want to get splattered. We need to get splattered. We need to engage in this. You just can't sit by and just go, well, I don't want to be the firm that I lose my clients, or I don't. What does that say about you? Why would I want to come to you if you don't have the what to actually defend yourself?
Here are the top stories on the Wall Street Journal front page tonight. S&P posts worst week since the election. U.S. added 151,000 jobs last month, below expectations. Tariff fights keep the Fed in holding pattern over rates. Stock market saw its worst week this week since September. Lucky for Trump, he's not even watching the markets, end quote. During his first term, Trump constantly used the stock market as a metric for success. He constantly told voters during the campaign that there would be a stock market crash if a Democrat was elected, even though the market has never been higher and your 401k has never done better than it did during the Biden presidency. But now Donald Trump wants us to believe that he's, quote, not even watching the markets. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been doing damage control on Trump tariff-induced chaos in New York this week because, you know, they're totally not watching or extremely worried about the markets.
If we ever went down 20% on the NASDAQ or 15% on the S&P, with people that want Trump to fail, that's going to be displayed across every newspaper in the world. I'm just wondering whether the tolerance for something like that for the administration.
Well, look, as you said, Joe, the market was up 20% last year, 20%
so there is
the year
some
before.
house money.
No. I'm going to put it another way.
Okay.
Did the Biden administration succeed? The American people weren't buying it just because the market was up.
That's Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary stating a true fact. The market was up 20% under Joe Biden as the economy roared back after COVID. But then Bessent says correctly that the stock market is not the only economic issue people vote on. Correct. It's not even the main one. But the stock market is a temperature check for the economy. It is, in a sense, a bet on how people think the economy will do. And the economy is people, workers, consumers, businesses. There's never a time when wages are up and jobs are plentiful and interest rates are low and the stock market is crashing. So when the stock market nosedives, as it did a couple times this week, it's a signal that there's possibly a problem. That problem might be contained to the stock market, but in this case, it might be broader. If Donald Trump's erratic on-again, off-again trade war with Mexico and Canada continues, investors will remain uncertain and businesses won't hire. Trump was at it again today with a new tariff threat on Canadian dairy products and lumber, one day after announcing a pause on some imported goods from Canada and Mexico. This is the first jobs report of Trump 2.0. The U.S. economy added 151,000 net new jobs in February, falling short of economists' expectations of 170,000 jobs. The unemployment rate rose from 4.4% to 4.1%. Federal government employment fell by 10,000 thanks to DOGE. The impact of Donald Trump and Elon Musk's mass firings are only just starting to emerge, and Trump and Elon Musk will say, oh, these are just federal worker jobs. Federal worker jobs are jobs. Federal workers have families. They buy coffee, they buy lunch, they buy dinner when they are employed. They have cars, they have mortgages, they take vacations. The impact doesn't end with laid-off employees, and they're not just in D.C. and Maryland and Virginia, but in all the places across the country, with veterans hospitals and Social Security offices and IRS buildings and farms with USAID contracts. Yeah, there are a lot of them, a lot of USAID contracts buy agriculture from American farms. We're just starting to see the real impact. Joining us now, Robert Reich. He served as the Secretary of Labor under President Bill Clinton. He's a professor of public policy at UC Berkeley and a co-founder of Inequality Media. Professor, it's always good to see you. Thank you for being with us. This does come across a bit like chaos. The tariffs on, the tariffs off, it just, the whole thing doesn't make, there's no theory of the game here unless you have one.
I don't have one, Ali. I'm sorry. It is chaos, and the markets hate chaos. Investors don't like uncertainty to begin with. And by the way, that unemployment report that you got was based on surveys that are done in the middle of the month. They were done in the middle of this past month, but the real chaos broke out with regard to the tariffs over the last couple of weeks.
Yep.
So I don't even want to predict, but I worry about the next unemployment report.
Let's talk a little bit about what we're solving for. A lot of business reporters today and yesterday were trying to get to the bottom of this. Some of them were conservative, but they're saying, what exactly are you solving for? You and I have talked for a long time about the fact that there's fundamental inequality in the United States. There's a lot of wealth. There's a lot of stock market value. There's a lot of GDP in America. It's not equally divided. That's the thing that someone should be solving for. It's even a thing that Donald Trump argued he would solve for. But that's not what any of this is doing.
No, in fact, it's just the opposite. The people who are paying really in a very large way for the inflation and the inflationary expectations that a lot of consumers have right now. In fact, one of the most important reports out last week was that consumer confidence is going down and their expectations of inflation are going up. And the people who pay most are obviously people who are working class and poor because it takes a larger chunk out of their paychecks. What we're also seeing, Ali, is a great deal of uncertainty with regard to prices. You remember, Donald Trump was elected by a lot of people who thought the economy was bad. You and I know that the data actually showed the economy to be pretty good, but prices did not come down.
Right.
And what they really wanted was prices to come down. Prices are not coming down. Donald Trump is doing nothing to get prices down. In fact, quite the opposite is happening. Those tariffs, if they go through, and I assume they will be going through, are going to raise prices. And if he goes through with his threat to expel and kick out of the country, 11 to 15 million American workers, even if they are not properly here, that's going to also have a huge negative effect on prices.
But the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, said something interesting. They're changing the narrative here. He's saying low prices, I'm paraphrasing, but he says it's not really the American dream. That shouldn't be our goal. Whether that's true or not, whether we should be paying more because we should have universal health care or we should have higher wages, that's a different story. Y'all campaigned on bringing prices down, and you're actually engaging in things that will bring prices up while supporting a federal budget that is going to take all of these cuts that Elon Musk is undertaking and put them toward tax breaks for the wealthy.
Exactly. And it's not just Doge and Elon Musk's compatriots who are making these cuts. The Republican budget also talked about $880 billion of cuts in Medicaid and other social programs that people depend on, particularly working class and poor people, in order to make way for what is expected to be $4.5 trillion of tax cuts. I mean, this is reverse Robin Hood on steroids. This is not what a lot of Trump voters voted for. They probably, I would expect that they have a lot of buyer's remorse right now.
Well, the $4.5 trillion in cuts, though, there's some fancy math going on with alternative math, let's call it. The argument that Republicans are using is that don't count those because they were already on the books. We're just extending them, so they shouldn't count as $4.5 trillion, which is kind of like saying I spend $250 a week on groceries, and I'm going to keep on spending $250 a week on groceries, so let's just take it out of the budget because it's already there.
That's
that $4.5 trillion.
It means that the federal debt keeps on growing.
Yes.
And the deficit keeps on growing. And the amount of that money that pays actually bondholders, people who hold the debt, keeps on growing. So in that way as well, average working people and the poor are being shafted.
The question is when they'll catch up to this, because the average viewer is astute. They knew they were paying more for the price of eggs. They understood that. You can't tell people they're not. They're also going to realize they're paying a lot more for the price of eggs now and a whole lot of other things. And they're going to see a whole bunch of wealthy people get a tax cut at the expense of their Medicaid, their community health centers, their VA hospitals. Bob, good to see you again. As always, former Secretary of Labor Robert Reich.
Thanks, Alex.
$50 past the hour now, and new fallout in the wake of a significant Supreme Court ruling this week. Republicans are now taking aim at Justice Amy Coney Barrett, a Trump appointee, after she joined the court's liberal justices to reject the Trump administration's freeze on foreign aid. The 5-4 decision allows USAID to restart nearly $2 billion in payments. Joining us now, NBC's Lawrence Hurley and Christy Greenberg, former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst. Lawrence, just first set the scene for us here. Why is Trump world turning on Justice Amy Coney Barrett? I'll be honest, when I was covering her confirmation battle, I couldn't have fathomed that we would end up here.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to remember is that they're not turning on her for voting to overturn Roe v. Wade. They're not turning on her for expanding gun rights, for ending affirmative action in college admissions, and all these other rulings where she's been a staunch conservative vote on the court. What they're turning on her for, as this USAID ruling showed, is that she's not fully aligned with the Trump agenda 100% of the time. So for some loud voices online who have a lot of followers, 100% is all that's needed, not 95%. And that's kind of where we are right now.
They are very loud voices. But Christy, remind here of what this ruling even was, because it was $2 billion in payments to USAID, but for contractors who had already done the work.
Right. The district court here issued a temporary order saying that essentially the president can't seize money that Congress had already directed him to spend for work that was already done. And all the Supreme Court did here is ask the district court, hey, clarify that order. They didn't disturb this temporary order. That's not to say they couldn't later. They just left it in place for the time being. And that's not such an extraordinary, act to do. And I think it really signals that at least Justice Barrett and Justice Roberts, they're not all that pleased with the president of the United States talking about defying federal court orders. And this may signal at least some solidarity with a lower court in saying that the government can't just ignore lower court orders, that they need to follow those. The one thing I will also say is that when you look at some of the criticism online, it is ugly. And it is all about the fact that she is weak, she is timid, she's bitter, she's a DEI hire. These are very gendered criticisms of Justice Barrett. And given how that she, as Laura said, she hasn't really done anything to undermine her conservative credentials here, those seem wildly inappropriate and out of line.
Well, I'm glad that you bring this up, because I want to drill a little deeper here. Bring back up the graphic on the screen of the way that this vote actually broke down, and you'll see that Justice Coney Barrett is on the same side of this equation as the Chief Justice John Roberts, and yet she is the one being called a DEI hire, evil, a closet Democrat. Those are direct quotes. So what do you think is behind that? I mean, is this just the latent misogyny that all of us have covered within Trump world right now, the undercurrent of it that is just so palpable online? Christy?
I agree completely with that. The one other thing I would say is they also, I think the difference between Justice Barrett and Justice Roberts is that Trump appointed Justice Barrett or nominated her. And so I think given that, they expect that essentially she was going to be bought and paid for. And that's just not how it works. She's showing that she's independent. She's showing that she is willing to evaluate each case on its own and not necessarily always vote for Trump's interests. And that's what anybody would expect of a good justice. The fact that this is a problem for conservatives online really speaks more to their issues than those of Justice Barrett.
Yeah, and yet it also speaks to the way that MAGA world has operated and the way that Trump likes it, which is if you're on the team, you're loyal. And when you're not, that's when we start having problems. And certainly this ecosystem online fosters that. But we're watching it now spill over. Lawrence Hurley and Christy Greenberg, thank you both for bringing your expertise on this issue.
Could the economic pain that Donald Trump is inflicting in service of tariffs lose him and Republicans a key voting bloc? There are already some signs it could be happening. Let me explain. A big reason why Donald Trump won the White House was support from young men of Generation Z, activated, a little bit older than this kid, activated by Trump's machismo and political incorrectness, but also by his economic profile. They consider themselves high-risk hustlers. That's how pollster John Della Volpe told it to Puck's Peter Hamby. Quote, Gen Z men who are more likely than their peers to bet on sports, invest in stocks, and dabble in crypto. Their financial mindset is shaped by the belief that playing it safe leads to economic stagnation. But as both crypto and the stock market shudder and prices for things like eggs skyrocket, Trump is losing approval among these voters. Joining us now, founding partner at Puck and host of Snapchat's Good Luck America, Peter Hamby. Peter, it is good to see you. It has been a long time.
Good to see you, Katie. Thank you.
Explain this. The Gen Z men, the assumption is that they're firmly behind Donald Trump. What's going on?
I think you actually defined that group pretty well. I think you and I both have been out on the road and talked to a lot of voters, all ages, races, genders. There's an assumption, though, maybe among Democrats, on the left, journalists perhaps, that all young men are red hat wearing, anti-woke UFC fans who like Trump because he tells it like it is. But as you said, that's part of it. I spent so much of last year out in the swing states talking to younger voters of all kinds. The economic insecurity angle is very important. This is a generation, no matter the gender, that came up during the pandemic. Their biggest fear is access to the economy. If you look at polls, younger people are more likely to say it's not just the cost of living, it's also jobs than older generations are. But John Del Vallape's polling is very smart on this. He's doing a monthly tracking poll. He's the Harvard youth pollster, kind of the gold standard. He basically found that there's a subset of young men. He sort of categorizes them this way. They're more likely to gamble, crypto, stock market, et cetera, because they don't see a path to wealth, to owning a house, to owning a car, even in the way that previous generations did. And so they're more willing to take risks. And look, if you look at John's polling, Trump's approval rating among young men overall is pretty steady, Katie, but his approval rating on the economy has dropped 14 points between January and February. His approval rating on inflation has dropped 15 points among young men between January and February. And so if you look under the hood in polling at these economy numbers, that's true across all ages, but it can kind of be a canary in the coal mine for larger problems with his approval rating, which we see are going down. But I think the big picture here is young people, young men in particular, are giving Trump the benefit of the doubt overall. They like him. They want him to succeed. But the economy number is really bad because they're looking at their portfolios and their wallets.
Yeah, when does that benefit of the doubt run out? Is there a bottom? Is there a number that where it gets too low and Donald Trump can't make a comeback from it?
If his overall approval ratings among young men start to drop, I think that will mirror larger approval ratings among all men, and they will start to go down. Donald Trump's approval rating is not great. I think the whole political universe right now is sort of frozen in this moment. They think Trump is all powerful and he will be here forever. Presidents come in very hot and popular, and they're popular until they're not. Joe Biden at this time was plus 15 net fave. We saw what happened with his approval rating later. And then go back to George Bush or Jimmy Carter or Barack Obama, whoever. And Donald Trump is starting out from a pretty low approval rating. So I think the bottom line, I talked to one Republican strategist about this who's working on some Senate and governor's races for next year. His take was just that people want to see competence from Donald Trump on the economy. Again, it's not just culture war stuff for young men. They want to see results. For a lot of these voters, this was their first election, and they took a chance on Trump, or they, saw for the first time after the pandemic, the cost of living wasn't bad, wasn't good, hard to find a house, hard to get a job, et cetera. He's going to be our guy, but he needs to show results. I'm not saying it has to happen right now, but if we get into, the summertime and, people's crypto wallets aren't great, I have a feeling Donald Trump's going to feel that in his polling too.
Let me ask you about some of the other canaries in the coal mine here. And you talk about some of the bro podcasters, the Just Asking Question podcasters. And you also mentioned Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports, and that he's not such a... You can't paint him with an easy brush to say that he's just a Donald Trump supporter, although he did vote for Donald Trump. And that he released this tweet, and this could mean something. Why is the release of the Epstein list always a bleep show, he says? What's the point of booting out illegals and criminals while somehow becoming a safe haven for the Tate brothers? Why is crypto in the toilet if Trump is crypto king? How far does Tesla stock have to crash before Elon goes back to work? Tell me about Portnoy's influence here.
I used Portnoy in my piece as a good example of, I think, a thing that, again, Democrats miss about the quote-unquote bro vote, which I think is a pejorative. I agree with John Fetterman on that, actually. It only turns people off. But I listen to a few Barstool podcasts. Katie, I have 2 Washington Commanders Barstool T-shirts. He's not just a red hat wearing Trump guy. Dave Portnoy is a role model to a lot of younger people. He's a millennial. He's not Gen Z. He's transparent. He built his company from nothing. He's funny. Yes, he doesn't like political correctness. Yes, he voted for Donald Trump. But he was also, he came out against the Dobbs decision. And so I used him as an example of, a lot of people sent me that very tweet and said, oh my gosh, is Trump losing the bros? I mean, I think Dave Portnoy is a good example of a kind of younger male Trump voter that isn't full-blown culture war. They don't care about the Tate brothers. They don't care about the Epstein files. You know, they do care about money and making it in the world. And he's not Theo Von. He's not Joe Rogan. He's not Clay Travis. He's just a guy that young people looked up to. He's adjacent to politics, but not of it. And so I thought that tweet was a good example of what we're talking about. Portnoy, and he said this out loud, is giving Trump the benefit of the doubt too. But he said this on Fox Business the other day. He wants to see his stocks go up and his wallet fatter. And I think a lot of young men would probably agree with that.
I also think one thing to watch is, as you mentioned, he wasn't a fan of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. There is an inherent tension there because a lot of, that category of voters, not necessarily the most culturally conservative voters. All right. Peter
that shows up in polling, Katie. I mean, young Gen Z men, like, they believe in climate change. They don't care as much about the abortion wars that older generations do. They do care about practical issues and making it in the world.
Yeah, and not being politically correct. You could add that to it. Peter Hamby,
Certainly.
thank you very much for joining us. Please do come back.